Muslims try to argue the point and say it was only for a certain battle. But this is what's written in their book. So draw your own conclusion. Remember, thy Lord inspired the angels with the message, I am with you. Give firmness to the believers. I will instill terror into the hearts of the unbelievers. Smite ye above their necks, and smite all their fingertips off them. Muhammad not only codified this in the Quran, but his quest to establish his religion through militaristic campaigns to force it on people began 1400 years ago and continued to this day through his minions. Then there's China, who has been at war with us for quite a while and even seems to have used chemical warfare. Originated in Wuhan Institute of Virology. But Joe Biden never misses an opportunity to ignore that. So, arguing that letting America's enemies become part of our lawmaking body, either directly or by proxy, during we is not a valid comparison, is lacking proper focus and historical predicate. Is God giving America over to its enemies because of our depraved actions? As we've said, the political left calls itself progressive to disarm and deceive us and describe themselves in a more palatable way to hide their nefarious agenda. We all like progress, but we don't all like the idea of reconstructing the Soviet Union in America. The progressives are trying to seduce, if not force, America into becoming a godless society by using lies, propaganda, deliberate misinterpretations, and subversion of our own laws to weaken any opposition to their goal of turning America into a secular, socialist nation. Let's point out here the edict in item 16 of the 1958 Communist Plan. Use technical decisions of the courts to weaken basic American institutions by claiming their activities violate civil rights. Sound familiar? Remember the abolition of prayer in schools, separation of church and state, redefining the word sex in the 1964 Civil Rights Act to provide protected class status for homosexuals, abortion on demand. These are Democrat values. Since they would never succeed in taking over this nation by military force, their weapon of choice has been surreptitiously infiltrating government, Congress, legislatures, state and city executive positions, and the judiciary. Like a swarm of termites eating us up from the inside, as was prophesied by former Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev, and to gain or ensure their hold on power and push their laws through, they circumvent the democratic process of the electorate and cling to the courts, where they only have to convince one judge or a small collection of judges, usually leftists picked by leftists, who are willing to legislate from the bench, with no consideration for the free exercise clause in the First Amendment. The political left continues to pick at our nation and our religious base, knocking out a chip at a time to undermine our foundation until Humpty Dumpty has a great fall. They claim, for example, that putting a religious-oriented statue like the Ten Commandments on public property violates the constitutional principle of separation of church and state. The Constitution doesn't have unwritten principles. It is pretty specific and well-written. Why haven't patriotic Americans stepped on their necks a lot harder and reminded them that the First Amendment of the Constitution is completely silent about conflating church and state? More importantly, as stated above, the First Amendment contains a free exercise clause, 2, which protects a citizen's right to freely practice their chosen religion. But that's the part of the Constitution the secular left prefers to ignore. As a sidebar, when the Chinese virus, referred to as COVID-19, raised its ugly head, minor politicians began imposing social distancing in the name of public health, and thereby limited the number of people who could be in churches. But apart from comments on Fox News, not a word was spoken to criticize or regulate dozens of BLM and anti-anarchists gathering in crowds to break windows, torch cars, vandalize and fire to police stations and churches. The Democrat propaganda machine called it mostly peaceful protests. So, why is arson a felony if it's mostly peaceful? In some cases, especially in California, Radical leftist governors even tested we the people by telling churches they had to close, and their congregations were not allowed to meet at all. Was that a violation of the Free Exercise Clause? Very likely. People need to understand the importance of what laws say. But it is equally important what the law does not say, and the First Amendment does not say religion can be practiced freely as long as politicians allow it or as long as Christian worshippers stay 6 feet apart. Fortunately, there are justices in the Supreme Court who recognize that and ruled that churches cannot be closed under the aegis of public health. In the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, it only says that the government can't establish an official state religion. Bearing in mind what Henry VIII of England did in 1534, and as we said above, he was known to have burned people at this stake who disagreed with him. And let's not overlook that. If we really insisted on separating church and state, why do we have a chaplain in both houses of Congress? Why is there a chaplain corps in each of the armed forces? Speaking of church and state, no matter how you spin it, putting a marble statue of the 10 Commandments on state/public grounds does not establish a religion. It might establish a good roost for birds, or provide a bit of shade for squirrels in the summer. But it takes a lot more to establish a religion than putting a piece of marble on a plot of grass. When the state of Oklahoma wanted to put a statue of the 10 Commandments on state grounds, Satanists from New York threatened to sue, if necessary, to exercise what they thought was their equal right to put a statue of Baphomet, adopted by the Church of Satan, established in 1966, as their official symbol, beside the statue of the 10 Commandments. Governor Mary Fallin, a weak-kneed, career politician with the spine of a jellyfish, backpedaled and canceled the placement of the statue to avoid being the governor who allowed a satanic statue to be put on the state capitol grounds. Perhaps she feared that Okies would have been after her with torches and pitchforks. Thus, Satan, with the help of New York devil worshippers, was able to checkmate God again because we the people lacked the courage of our forefathers who blew the heads off British soldiers because the English king put a tax on their favorite beverage. Why didn't Governor Fallin think, instead, to tell the New Yorkers there is no provision in the federal or state constitution that provides equal space for Satan worshippers who didn't even live in Oklahoma? The left would invoke the provisions of the 14th Amendment's guarantee of equal protection under the law. But putting a monument on state grounds isn't a matter of protection. It's a matter of the state's preference in decorating. And the 14th Amendment doesn't have any guidance on that. There is a war memorial statue on the same grounds. But nobody fussed about offering equal space to the enemies we fought just to have equality in decorating. There is a statue of a cowboy on a horse on the south side of the Capitol building. So will Oklahoma be forced to give some space to a statue of an Indian on a horse to stand beside the cowboy? God made the trees and bushes that adorned the state grounds around the Capitol building in Oklahoma City. Does that mean they'd have to cut them all down in the name of separation of church and state? What if Oklahoma planted Joshua trees? Does that violate separation of church and state, since Joshua was the right-hand man for Moses?